morning to you all. I think you're crazy for being inside on such a beautiful day. It's so pretty outside today. Take advantage of it. Tim, thank you very much, and give the provost our best. Thank you, Bill and Steve Clem, for inviting me. This is, for me, this is a chance to talk to a lot of people at one time. I don't get a chance to do that very often. I'm the quintessential man behind the screen. In all relationships, I'm the guy that you don't see for the most part. And so they've asked us to do this. I thought until yesterday afternoon I was going to be able to have Senator Brown here. But as you all have been reading in the paper, the financial regulation legislation has broken free. The Republicans have pulled their holds, and they've begun to negotiate on that. They brought it to the floor of the Senate, and so they were in until late last night, and he's coming, Sherrod's coming today back to Ohio, but he wasn't able to get here for this morning. If you know anything about us at all, you know that we work on the mantra of helping those who work hard, play by the rules, achieve middle-class status, and those who want to. That's who we're working for. That's what we do. Everything that we do, every action we take, every meeting we hold, it's about what does that do for the middle class and how does that help our economy, and what actions can we take. In that regard, you know, I think by now that Senator Brown went to the Senate in 2006. I was elected in 2006, started office in 2007, and one of the first things he wanted to get done was the health care revisions, and I'm going to cover a few of the benefits that come from that. For the last couple of years, if you were for health care reform, you kind of paid attention to the details. If you were against health care reform, you were just against health care reform. You didn't really look at the inside. Now that it's passed, many people are in fact looking far more deeply into the legislation, what it does and what makes for small businesses. What Tim did not say about me is I'm the Forrest Gump of our operation. Wherever I'm going, something really bad's going to happen or has already happened, or something really good is going to happen. And so I keep moving in a kind of a counter-cyclical tour to Sherrod. When he gets stuck in D.C., I tend to come out here. Otherwise, I'm in Washington, D.C. Steve asked me to talk a little bit about the Hugo Boss situation. I think you all know, have read newspapers. If you're from this area, you know how complicated the Hugo Boss situation turned out. It now appears to be a pretty good result for Ohio. It's not quite the result we would have set out to get. And I thought I'd walk through a little bit about, I've cleaned it up a bit because you wouldn't want me working with you on saving your company and then coming to a conference like this and telling all the inside dirty laundry. But there were a lot of public things that went on, and there were some private things that went on. And I think it's important to acknowledge all the different elements that went into the Hugo Boss situation. The beginning was about a year ago, 2009, April. The union and the company broke off negotiations. It was the Unite here. Is that it? Unite is the union, the SEIU union, and they couldn't, and the company couldn't, or the workers couldn't get the union to come back, or the company to come back to the bargaining table. And so they started calling us and telling us what the situation was. At the time, they had roughly 350 employees. Hugo Boss is a German manufacturer of men's clothing, far above my pay grade. I can't afford that stuff, but sells for $1,000 or better. And the union members started giving us information, and the employees started giving us information. Sherrod went there a couple of times last year. John Ryan, who is our state director, went there a couple of times. Our staff, Max Blackman is our regional staff right here. Raise your hand, please. But we have staff like Max all over the state. And they worked with the Hugo Boss employees a lot. And they couldn't get them back to the negotiating table. And what we got from the union eventually was that a lot of information that Hugo Boss, the German company, was really owned by a British investment bank called Permira. And Permira is a very well-heeled, very well thought of, long-term investment bank that does very good funding, very good investments. And they get their money from all over the world. Well, they get it from pension funds, many of them from the United States. And we got a list of all the investors in Permira, including Ohio PERS, CalPERS, New York State Pension Fund, Michigan, and a dozen others. I mean, there were 50 investors in this fund, each one of whom contributed at least $100 million, and many much more than that. So these were really big numbers, and when they bought it, they didn't just buy Hugo Boss, they bought Valentino, another manufacturer, Italian manufacturer of, is it men's clothing or women's clothing? I don't know what they make. But anyway, they're in the clothing business, and so they bought them, and the fund, the Permira fund, was just doing terribly. It was not producing any results for the investment companies or the pension funds. And so they were angry with them to begin with. And then when they found out they were the owner of the Hugo Boss that was going to move 350 employees out of Ohio and open up new operations in Bulgaria and Turkey, that really set them off. So we went to the folks that run the Ohio PERS and with the governor and worked out a letter that they then sent to Permira. That letter became the model for other letters that CalPERS and New York State all sent. So that was at that level. At the Permira level, they know they've got this asset that's not doing what it should be doing. It's not producing the results. And they're angering all their investors. So that's, you know, if you're a Permira manager or owner, you're sitting there thinking, how did I get into this? At the Hugo Boss level, eventually we did two things happened. We only did one of them. The NLRB ruled on the union's behalf that the company had never finished negotiations. They had come to a breakdown in the wage rate. So the wages that were currently being paid on average are $12 an hour to these employees. And they had rejected a $9 an hour offer from the company. At that point, they stopped talking. NLRB came in and said, well, if you're going to close the factory, you've got to have a formula for doing it, you've got to have a process for doing it, who's getting let go when and under what conditions. And so you have to go back and finish that negotiations. At about the same time, Sherrod sits on the Banking Committee and the HELP Committee, which is Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. So we have kind of a bogey there that we can play with sometimes. And he announced that one of those committees and one of his subcommittees on either of those committees would be holding a hearing on short-termism, the decision-making of making all of your decisions on next quarter and not looking out over the long run, not looking out over the lifetime of the employees or the company, but looking out only for the next quarter. So that was just out there in the atmosphere, the atmospherics, if you will. And eventually we settled on holding a hearing on short-termism, but we noticed a hearing on the 22nd of April. And the notice was the governor was going to be on one panel. The managing partner of Permira in the United States was going to be on another panel. And his request, he wanted to be alone, which when the kids in Washington heard that, they were all afraid about that. And I said, absolutely not. That's perfect. Just leave him on his own panel, because then you can ask anything. And the third panel was a series of experts having to do with pension funds and management and all kinds of other issues that we really wanted to hear from on short-termism, people that had written on that subject. The union and the company were negotiating. They negotiated about the 14th of April, and on the 22nd of April, they were to have their next negotiation session. I think I have these dates right. And at midnight or 2 in the morning, they came to an agreement. The company never went back and did the closure negotiations. They went back and reopened negotiations. As the end result, what had been a 350-member company working about 60% of the time. No employees, virtually no employees were there full-time anymore because they didn't have the work to keep them busy. But they had 350 people. They kept them busy about 60% of the time. The resulting negotiations, and I could have some of these details wrong because they're a little fluid. There's some interpretation still going on in the contract negotiations. But essentially, they went from 350 part-time workers to 300 full-time workers. And they're going to come back. We met with the company yesterday because I had made the commitment to them when I met with them 2 months ago. If you stay, we're still here, and we're here for you. If you leave, I'm going to kill you. More or less. I didn't actually say that. But that was the intent. But if you stay, if you make a commitment to stay in Ohio, we're still your senator. We're still going to try and figure out how to make this work for you. So we went back and met with them, and that night at 2 in the morning, they agreed that they would come back. The average wage, if I understand it correctly, is going to be roughly $10. You can make more. It's a piece rate kind of proposition, but you can make more. But the average rate is going to probably go from about $12 to $10. Bless you. When I first went to meet with the manager on the operation, she said, you know, at $12 an hour, I can just barely make my mandate. Whatever they're asking me to make, at $12 an hour employees, I can just get that done. She said, I can't imagine doing that with $9 an hour employees. I just don't know how I'll do it. I don't know whether their performance will be up to par. So that was the final results of our hearing. It was held 2 days ago, because Sherrod's just on if you go out and listen to your car radio and tune to NPR, he's on the radio about every 7 minutes now. It sounds like a campaign commercial, but it's a very good report on that hearing and the results of that hearing. We took the governor off, we took the premier guy off, and it was just the panel of experts talking about short-termism and how we as a legislative body at the Senate level, including the House, and the work that we do with the House, how we can work toward encouraging much longer-term thinking, much longer-term investment that protects not only the companies, but the individuals who work for them, the owners of the companies, whether they're inside or outside, and the publics and the communities in which they serve. You know, it's a real shame when you look at large plant closings, large operational closings. DHL in Wilmington, Ohio is a good example. Any of the auto companies, Hoover in North Canton, in many cases have an 8 to 15% impact on their school board funding, their city funding. All their municipal services are cut as a result of that, and they've got no recourse to come back from that. So we're trying to build an economy or encourage an economy to be built that moves forward on a long-term basis and really sustains that economic development. That's what we're focused on. I can talk about legislative stuff. I'll stay here for a little while this morning. Max told me I've got an extra half an hour. But when he says I gotta go, I gotta go. He's the guy that keeps the car keys and moves us around. Betty referred to a couple of pieces of legislation that we have. In fact, it is a Brown Sanders legislation. It's S2909 and S2914, both of which promote ESOPs and encourage them. Steve and Bill can get you all the information on that. Anytime you want information from us, our website is, and I don't know how to get into it, but the kids do. And they fill it up. They kind of keep it current all the time. And I know it has a lot of terrific information on it. And if you don't find the answer to what you're looking for there, then simply find one of us, find one of the regional guys, or talk to Bill or Steve or any of the other members of the team. I would do tribute to the entire front row of Cleveland Foundation members, but it's already been done, so I'm not going to do that. And I thank you very much for including me this morning. And I'm sorry Sherrod couldn't be here. He very much wanted to be. Next year, I'd hope to get him here. So thank you.